You don't know flag. You don't know flag.
Welcome to You Don't Know Flag, a podcast full of stories about retro gaming, retro computing, video games, arcade games, and technology from a guy who was there and still is. My name is Rob O'Hara, but for the next 30 minutes, you can call me Flag.
Episode 141. The Raspberry Pi.
Greetings and salutations, listeners, and welcome to another episode of You Don't Know Flack. Today is September 8th, 2013, and I am your host, Rob Flack O'Hara. On today's episode of You Don't Know Flack, we will be talking about the Raspberry Pi, the relatively new, small, miniature, ARM-based computer. But before we get into that, I have been experimenting and working on my soldering skills, and I have made a null modem cable that connects over to the modem port. I have an RS-232 adapter, and it hooks right to the Commodore 64, so I'm going to attempt to load the podcast. Of course, you know I've saved the podcast on my trusty C64, and so I'm going to try to move it over to my PC over this null modem cable during this part of the program that has become known as loading time.
Loading time. Loading time. Loading time.
So while that loads, we have a little bit of time to kill. I hate starting shows off with apologies about missed shows, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. I actually missed 2 weekends in a row of You Don't Know Flack, which I think is the first time that's happened in 2013. Now, in previous years, the show actually started I believe the first episode was recorded in 2008, and there were a couple of years where I only recorded 1 or 2 episodes, so missing 2 weekends in a row is not bad in the big picture of You Don't Know Flack, but I was trying to record one every weekend, and who knows, I may still make up those episodes. I keep saying that. I don't know when on earth I'll find the time, but that would be the ultimate goal, would be to do that. Since the last episode, several things have happened. The first is that I turned 40 years old. On August 22nd, 2013, I turned 40 years old. So people say, well, what did you do for your 40th birthday? And unfortunately, what I did was served as a pallbearer at my uncle's funeral in Chicago. My Uncle Joe passed away unexpectedly at the age of 58. He was out golfing a couple of days before, came home, was complaining about stomach pains, and woke up in the middle of the night and called 911 and was rushed to the hospital, and from what I understand, never really regained consciousness. I would say what I get from my Uncle Joe, it's my dad's brother, and Uncle Joe is the third of 5 kids on the O'Hara side. What I get from my Uncle Joe, along with my dad, was my love of the Three Stooges. My Uncle Joe had I have a Star Wars room in my house. My Uncle Joe had a Three Stooges room. Apparently, it may have even been a point of contention in the house. So he had a large collection of Three Stooges posters and collectibles and things like that. So my dad told me that when they were kids, they would air the Three Stooges on television on a local Chicago station. And so that's why they both grew up enjoying the Three Stooges. So I got those things from him and my dad, of course. My Uncle Joe also collected signs. He worked at a hospital in Chicago, and he collected hats. And I have probably 20 or 30 baseball hats. I wouldn't call it a collection necessarily, but whenever we would go there, those are the things I remember, about his house and being around him. So, yep, that's what I did for my 40th birthday is Hopped in a car, drove up, spent 8 hours at a Irish wake, which was a first time experience for me. I don't know that I'm sure I've never attended a wake, for anybody I knew or otherwise. So that was an interesting experience. I think I described it on my blog as probably the perfect family gathering. It was like everybody in my family was there and getting along and well dressed and well mannered. And if it hadn't been for the fact that my dead uncle was lying in a box on the other side of the room, it would have been perfect. So it was a very surreal experience. And so the wake was the day before my birthday. And then the day that night, someone was running around asking who was available to be a pallbearer. And someone asked me, and I said, sure. So on my 40th birthday, that's what I did, was I carried my uncle's coffin to and from a hearse multiple times. So many experiences. It definitely will be a birthday I will not forget. So since the last show, I drove to Chicago, which is 12 hours, was there for 2 days, drove home from Chicago, and then the following week I drove to Kansas City, and I spent a week in Kansas City for work. And, sometimes these things lend themselves to hooking up with friends of mine on the internet or visiting with people, and sometimes they don't. This just happened to be a trip where literally we left the hotel each morning at 7 a.m. We got to work at 8 a.m. We ate lunch on site. We worked until 5 or 6 p.m. We left. We went back to the hotel. We went as a group out to dinner and then got back to our hotel rooms at 9 or 10 p.m. So just didn't leave a lot of spare time. So sometimes the trips work out where I get spare time in the cities or whatever. Sometimes they don't. I have a trip coming up in a few weeks to Tempe, Arizona, which I guess is just west of Phoenix. And my goal is I'm going to drive and I'm going to stop in Albuquerque, and I want to go see all the cool Breaking Bad film locations. There's only 4 weeks left of Breaking Bad. And so I want to go see Walter White's house, and I want to go eat at Los Pollos Hermanos and do all those, goofy fan type things. The whole show is filmed in and around Albuquerque. So I would really like to do that. I don't know that I've ever done that for a television show. I did talk about, and I'll put this in the show notes, a few filming locations I've been to in and around Oklahoma, the most memorable of which was Weird Al's UHF, which was filmed in Tulsa. So I did go to some Tulsa filming locations. But other than that, there's been one or two scenes, like there was a couple of scenes from The Outsiders. The Outsiders was filmed in Tulsa, so I've been to a couple of locations there, but UHF was definitely was my favorite of all those. What else do I have? I don't know that I have too much else. I've just kind of been out of pocket. I have a couple of shows now that I've been teasing. One is a Star Wars collectible show that I would like to record with Earl Green from thelogbook.com, and I also have a skateboarding episode that I've been talking about recording for several months now with my friend Mikey, and I just haven't got around to getting the technology, everything set up and configured to record a Skype call or do a locally recorded audio file or whatever we're going to do. So those are coming, and I will work on those because I really want to do that. I want to expand You Don't Know Flack. I mentioned this before. I enjoy all the other podcasts that I've been on, Throwback Reviews and Adventure Club, No Quarter, all the ones that I've contributed to, even the 2600 Game by Game podcast, when I send audio files in. I like all those more than I like my own. I like the interaction with people. When I started doing this by myself, it was because that was the only way I knew how to do it, so I do enjoy these little times where I get to close myself off in my room and turn everything off and make it nice and quiet and just sit here looking into this microphone and do a little recording. But I wouldn't mind doing some recording with other people too. So that's on the way. Unfortunately, it's not really, there's some technological hurdles that seem pretty easy to overcome, but more it's my own personal lack of of good planning that keeps those things. So I will work on that. If you have feedback about this episode or any other episode of You Don't Know Flack, you can always email your feedback to me at robohara@robohara.com, or you can leave a message for me on the You Don't Know Flack voicemail box. That phone number is 405-486-YDKF for You Don't Know Flack. If you would like to sponsor an episode, if you have something that you'd like to plug or anything like that, you can head over to the website, which is at podcast.robohara.com, and click on the sponsors link near the top of the webpage for more information. And that, my friends, is the sound of a podcast successfully being transferred from a Commodore 64 over to an IBM PC via a null modem cable. I should mention that I just recently bought a new laptop, like within the last week or so, and it came shipped with Windows 8, and so far I hate it. You know what? If it were a perfect world, we would all still be running XP or whatever the OS of your choice is that you were forced to get away from because the world changed. So the world has changed. I do have Windows 7 on my other laptop and on my main workstation, but this has Windows 8. So instead of reloading it, which is my knee-jerk reaction, I've left Windows 8 on here in an attempt to learn this OS, and I'm eagerly awaiting Windows 8.1, and which is supposed to add, I guess it's supposed to kind of retrofit some of the Windows 7 features back into Windows 8, like a freaking start button. I don't know who came up with the idea of getting rid of the start button and this whole Metro interface. It's the very first thing I do. You know, when I got Windows 95 way back when, the very first thing I did was I made a shortcut to a DOS prompt, to a command.exe. I made a shortcut to it and I dropped it into the start folder. So every time the machine booted, when it was done, it would come up to a Windows 95, to a desktop, like what we think of a desktop now, and then it would open a DOS prompt so that I could move around and do things. And so I've gone in and I've created a shortcut to my computer and to my documents and put them on the desktop. And I know that's not what, Microsoft, I guess, or Windows 8 wants me to do. I guess what they want me to do is never encrypt anything and turn it over to the NSA, but that's, that's another podcast too, isn't it? So I feel like I'm circumventing the way that Windows 8 wants me to operate within this space, but until I can figure out how to do what it wants me to do, that's the only way I know how to do certain things. So anyway, it's amazing though that I got that null modem cable working on a machine that doesn't have a serial port. So anyway, the podcast is over. Let's go ahead and get off that and get started with episode 141 of You Don't Know Flack, the Raspberry Pi. So the original idea behind You Don't Know Flack was that it was going to be about technology, and specifically it was going to be about old technology or new technology that works with old technology. So a couple of weeks ago, this relatively new technology dropped into my knowledge base, into my little world, and it just fits so well with what I had originally intended You Don't Know Flack to be about that I decided to push back the other episodes and record an episode specifically dedicated to the Raspberry Pi. So before I had heard of the Raspberry Pi, I had heard of the Arduino, I don't know if I'm saying that right, which is a small integrated circuit board, I guess you would say, that can be programmed to run programs in C or C++. And I like the idea of it. I considered buying one, but it's not really like a PC. It's not, for one thing that I didn't like about it was, well, first of all, I don't know C or C++, so I was going to have to learn something else to script or write code in. The other thing I didn't like was that there's not one single model of the Arduino, and not to get off on a side tangent, I wrote one word here. Actually, I wrote two words here. It says console gaming. But one thing that got me into console gaming and out of PC gaming was the fact that everybody has different PCs. And I was playing for a little while. I played some online games, and I was continually getting beaten by people with better hardware, people who had, better keyboards, or they had created macros in these games that we were playing online, or they had a better mouse, or they had, they had a faster PC, or, better video cards or whatever. So all these things that were different than my setup. But when I play online on the PlayStation 3, I know that I'm playing against other people that are using a PlayStation 3. It levels that playing field. I know this is a weird comparison, but if everybody had the same Arduino, then we could all share code. You could buy a case that would fit all of them. You would have everybody working on the same thing. And so that wasn't the case, so that was one of the things that kind of turned me off, to the Arduino. The Raspberry Pi, there are only two models, the Model A and the Model B, and I'm going to talk about those in just a second. But essentially, they're identical and that they're all the same. So anybody that has a Raspberry Pi, you can buy a Raspberry Pi case and it will fit your Raspberry Pi. Or you can, download software that has been compiled to work with the Raspberry Pi, and you don't need to recompile it with your own hardware, because it's already compiled. It's going to be compatible. So anyway, the Raspberry Pi is and I wrote this little paragraph here. It is a Linux compatible computer board that's about the size of a credit card. Comes in two models, as I mentioned, the A and the B. The B was released in February of 2012, and the A was released in February 2013. The B board, which is basically what I'm going to be talking about today, has a 700 megahertz processor. It has a 10100 Ethernet jack built in, two USB ports. It offers HDMI out and composite video out, also with a 3.5-inch audio jack out. It has a micro USB port for power and an SD card slot that it uses for storage. So instead of a hard drive or conventional storage, it uses a SD card. It also has, and I've seen this referred to in a couple of different names, but I believe this is correct, a MiPi, M-I-P-I camera port. And that contains a CSI input connector. So this is a connector that can be used to connect a camera to the Raspberry Pi, or you can use these pins for other different functions. Like you can drive motors with them. You can plug it into all different sorts of different types of peripherals. So that's the B board. And then there's the A board that I mentioned, which is newer. The A board only has one USB port instead of two, and it has no Ethernet adapter. And there's a technical reason for this. Basically, the Ethernet adapter that's on the B is a USB Ethernet adapter. So technically, the B board has three, but one is tied up permanently with the 10100 Ethernet adapter. Now, the lack of also it has half the amount of RAM. The B board has 512, the A board has 256. So the difference between these two boards is $10. The A, the cheaper one, is $25. The B board, which is the one I bought, is $35. I really couldn't see any reason to only buying an A. I mean, for $10, it seemed like it was really like you would just buy the B. I guess if you were doing some sort of integrated computing, where you were dedicating this to doing a certain task, it would never have a GUI on it. It would never be, doing anything like that, then I guess you could get away with running the A. But for $10, it seemed to me a really cheap upgrade to get one that would be a lot more versatile. The Raspberry Pi weighs 1.6 ounces, just to give you an idea of how small this thing is. It literally is about the shape and size as a credit card. And then it has ports on all four sides all the way around. So I have heard about the Raspberry Pi. I didn't really understand fully what the Raspberry Pi did or what it was capable of doing. And a friend of mine who came to visit recently, Charles Ubik Uberalis, if you know him from Digital Press or Atari Age, and he brought his Raspberry Pi. We did not fire it up, but he showed it to me, and I thought, this looks like something I would enjoy playing with. And so I ended up buying two. So I bought two B boards, two cases, and 2 power adapters. And so all of those things together shipped for less than $100. And so when they arrived, I split them up, and I took one and I gave it over to my dad. And the reason I did that is because my dad is the one who got me into computing. And he's the one that, and I've mentioned this before, I think I mentioned this on the last episode, that when he got into computers back in the TRS-80 days, you didn't buy a computer and then just walk in and buy software. You know, you wrote software. You made the computer do the things you wanted it to do. I remember I talked about this at Commodore, where he had laid out graphics on a sheet of graph paper of a bird flying. It was like a 4-cell animation. And then he spent all this time, writing a basic program that would turn these bits on and off and poke these little graphic addresses and make this little animation of a bird flying. So it wasn't like you bought a computer and said, I want to make this show, cartoons of a bird flying or whatever. It's like you got the computer and then you made it do things. And so that was the impression I got of the Raspberry Pi, was that you didn't say, oh, well, I'm buying a Raspberry Pi. It'll do this, 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 or that. It was like you got a Raspberry Pi and then you went and played with it. You make it do whatever it is you want to do. You throw it into a project, or you look at the other projects that people have created and then you duplicate those things. So anyway, I gave one set to my dad and I have the other set. And, kind of in a joking way, I was like, well, let's see what you can do with yours and I'll see what I can do with mine. To be honest with you, I haven't done anything original with mine. Everything I've done is projects that other people have done. And I have just, taken their projects and downloaded them and put them on my card and got things running. So, I haven't really done anything on my own yet, but I would like to. And so I'll talk about some of the projects I've seen here shortly. For power for the Raspberry Pi, you can run it off of a PC USB port, or you can buy a wall adapter. And so the wall adapter I ordered, it says USB wall adapter for Raspberry Pi. You would think that would include the USB cable that connects the power adapter to the Raspberry Pi, but it does not. So when mine arrived, I received a Raspberry Pi. And I did receive the wall adapter, but I did not receive a cable that would connect those two things, which seemed kind of stupid, really. I mean, they ought to know why people are ordering this stupid thing. So it could at least say, hey, you're buying parts A and C. Would you like B that connects them? So anyway, then my dad ordered 2 cables, and so he gave me 1 cable. So, also, let's talk about the case that I ordered. It said Raspberry Pi case. I think it was about $7, red plastic. When I got it, it is the biggest stupid, it's dumb looking. It's like way too big for the Raspberry Pi. I guess it's designed so you could put other things in there, but it's just goofy looking. And so, I ended up making my own case recently, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but, well, I can talk about it now, actually. I went online and I looked at some of the cases that other people have been making, and people have made them out of Legos and they made them out of wood. You can make a Raspberry Pi case. I mean, like I said, it's a credit card size computer. So you can make a case out of whatever you want. And so my family and I were at Big Lots and we were just wandering around. I was not thinking of the Raspberry Pi at the time. And we wandered over by the food area, and I saw these Pop-Tart cases, and they're little plastic cases that you would put Pop-Tarts inside, and they look like a Pop-Tart. It's just bigger than a Pop-Tart because you put 2 Pop-Tarts inside it. And the idea is that you would take your Pop-Tarts and put them in your kid's lunch. So you put them in this little protector thing and send it to school with your kids. When you're creating a balanced meal for your children, you send them to school with Pop-Tarts. I saw that and I thought, you know what? I bet the Raspberry Pi would fit inside that. And so I brought it home and it sure did. It fit right inside that. It has a little plastic clasp on one side. So I opened it up and shoved the Raspberry Pi in there. But of course, the thing is sealed all the way around. So I have seen many videos online and websites talking about dremeling things, and I have a Dremel. So I thought, I'm going to Dremel this. I'm going to Dremel the sides out, and it's going to look so awesome. And when I got done Dremeling it, it looked like it had been in a fire. There were all these curly pieces of plastic built everywhere. There's just none of the sides were level. All of the holes that I cut looked like maybe a rat had got, a hold of this thing and gnawed holes in it. It looks absolutely awful. So I evened the cuts out the best I could. When I was done, I used a Dremel wheel to try and sand it. And when that didn't work, I used an actual piece of sandpaper. I just wrapped it around one of my fingers and I sanded the edges. And so at least it's not left behind, sharp edges or anything like that. But yeah, it's definitely there's room for improvement, let's say. And I have been in talks with a friend of mine who is talking about making me a custom Raspberry Pi case. And if that comes, he's shown me a prototype, and if he's able to do what I think he is able to do, I'm going to have the coolest Raspberry Pi case ever. But so we'll wait and see. We'll see how that turns out. But if that thing comes to fruition, I'm throwing this. You know what? I'll give it away. I'll give away the Raspberry Pop-Tart case to one lucky listener. And by lucky, I mean unlucky. So anyway, what is a Raspberry Pi? Well, we basically talked. It's this little thing. It has ports all over it, and it is designed to run basically a Linux-based operating system. You can download, I guess, different versions, different flavors of Linux. There's one called Raspbian, which is a Debian-based operating system. And it's already optimized for the Raspberry Pi. So you download this. You use some software to write the image to an SD card. And once you've done that, you're done. You take the SD card, you plug it into your Raspberry Pi, and this thing boots up. I've been using HDMI just because you can get audio and video out of it. And recently I bought a 46-inch television because they're so darn cheap. In my computer room, I have 3 retro computers hooked up. I have an Amiga 1200. I have a Commodore 64, of course, and I have an Apple II. It's an Apple IIe. I have a 2C, but why did I? Oh, because I bought the CFFA 3000, which is the USB adapter, and it requires an internal card, so I couldn't use that on my 2C, so I put the 2C in the closet, and I pulled out the 2E, and so I have the 2E there. So I have these 3 computers, and I had 3 old monitors hooked up. They were actually all 3 Amdec monitors, it was taking up all this space and stuff. And I said, it'd be really cool if I got rid of those 3 monitors. And when I say I get rid of something, by the way, I never get rid of it. So what that means is I took them and I put them down in the garage. I said, wouldn't it be cool if I got rid of those 3 monitors and I replaced them with one flat screen monitor? And so I went to Sam's Club with the intent of buying a 24-inch flat screen television that I could run composite video into from these 3 computers. And so I went down, and I don't think they had 24-inch ones, but they had 27-inch maybe. I don't know. I could be making up sizes here, but let's say it was a 27-inch and it was like $199, something like that. And then right next to it is a 32-inch, and it was like $20 more. It was on sale, like $219. And I thought, well, if you're going to get a 30 or a 27-inch, you might as well get the 32-inch for another $20, And so as I was getting ready to get that, I thought, well, gosh, right here's a 35-inch for another couple of bucks, And so eventually when all was said and done, actually, I believe it's a 42-inch. So I bought this 42-inch TV, and it was on sale. It was like $279 or something. Samsung. So I thought, all right. So I brought it home and I put it on the computer desk. And so now I have this ridiculously large flat screen television. It's almost too big, really, for the room that it's in. But if you ever want to play Commodore games on a 42-inch screen television, I know where you can do it. So I got everything hooked up. But it's silly because it's a high def television. I'm not even using, any high def on it. I'm not even using the HD ports. And that reminds me, there's a whole separate thing. I need to buy a I guess it's like this external box or whatever for the Amiga, because I have a 1200 and I'm running the composite out into the TV and it looks like doo-doo. And I've been working off and on with Rob Sherman. Rob Sherman just sent me the CF adapter for the 1200. So I need to install that, but I'm still going to have doo-doo video coming out of it. And so I need to buy whatever they sell. I know they sell something. There's really no problem with retro computers that you can't solve with a credit card. That's what I've learned. That's what I've learned in this hobby is persistence and cash will get you far. So anyway, that was a long roundabout way of saying I'm not using the HDMI ports on this TV. So I hooked up an HDMI cable and I have the other end coming out. It plugs right into the Raspberry Pi. And so I decided to do a couple of projects. Well, I wanted to get the Raspberry Pi up and running, right? So I plug the Raspberry Pi in, I plug in the video, I plug in the power, I turn on, and it kind of does something. It has a little screen, and then it did nothing because I didn't have an operating system on it or whatever. So the first project I thought, you know what is something that I know? What is something that I'm good at? And what I'm good at is playing games. And so I did some Googling and I found RetroPie. So RetroPie is a pre-assembled collection of emulators and video games. And I didn't have a lot of luck with it. I downloaded it and then I tried to update it and I tried to do all these things and someone, I forget the name now, but told me basically I was doing it wrong on my blog and they were completely right. And so I found another build that someone has assembled or another collection called PyMame. And so I downloaded PyMame and I put it on the SD card and I went and stuck it in my Raspberry Pi and I booted it up and it works great. It comes right up to a menu system and it says, do you want to play video game or arcade emulators or do you want computer emulators or console emulators? And you go through the menu and you pick what you want. I have a USB gamepad and I plug that in. It says, hey, hello, USB gamepad. And that worked perfect. So the, I'm going to tell you right now that I'm not a Linux person. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably a 2. If you've read Commodore, you know that I spent some time, in the early days of IRC, getting on IRC and using shell accounts. And I learned enough Linux to know how to move software from point A to point B. And so, and that's pretty much the extent. I know get and put. I knew, SYNZ modem or, SZ and RZ back in the day. I knew how to make directories, copy files, delete files, get rid of directories. That was pretty much it, So far that's, essentially what I know on the Raspberry Pi now. I have learned sudo and I've learned nano and a few other very, very, very basic things. So I'm wading into Linux with baby steps, but I'm learning it. And I've copied some ROMs for PyMame over, and I copied some Commodore games over. There's a Commodore, it has a port of Vice on it, and I copied over a couple of Nintendo games, and they all work flawlessly. Well, flawlessly is not the right word. Some of the 16-bit MAME games that I tried, they play at full speed, but it sounds to me like the sound has been greatly downsampled. And I'm wondering if that's a default setting that's in this version of MAME, to keep the speed at 100%. But basically what I've learned with PyMame and the Raspberry Pi in general is that everything is configurable. You find the right config file and the right setting and what you want to change it from and to, and you can make this little thing do anything you want. So I am greatly looking forward to not just playing with other people's creations, but doing some of my own, actually getting in there and learning, what these configuration files are, what they do. I've wanted to learn Linux for a long time. I really wanted to learn Linux when Windows 7 came out because I got so pissed off that they were pushing XP. I mean, it's the typical software life cycle, but I was so familiar with XP I was certified in XP, that I was like, you know what? Before I'll go to Windows 7, I'm going to put on Ubuntu. And so I did that, and I struggled. And I struggled because I don't know why. I guess it's just old habits die hard, you know. I support Windows and Windows systems at work. So, you know, that's my comfort area. That's my comfort zone. And so getting away from that is not only, I mean, it goes against what I've been doing for, you know, since the early 90s. I mean, I from the Commodore, I moved to PC, you know, so I've been doing DOS for 20 years, 30 years probably. I mean, all the way back to the PC Junior. So it's outside my comfort level, but I also want to do it. And that's, I've never, how can I put this? I didn't have a desire to learn it, because you have that failover. Like I got a netbook. Remember when those were popular for about 15 minutes? I bought a netbook, a little Acer Aspire with, whatever it was, an 8-inch or 9-inch screen or whatever. And I played with it for a while, and then it put it in the closet and collected dust. And then I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, put, Ubuntu on this, or maybe it wasn't Debian. It was Fedora. I think I put Fedora on there. And I thought, I'm going to learn this. Well, first of all, if you're trying to learn a new operating system, doing it on a 9-inch screen is not the way I would recommend it. Second of all, whenever I ran into a hurdle, I would just go do whatever that task was on one of my other 8, 9, 10 computers we had in the house at the time, you know. Oh, I don't know how to transfer, you know, change this JPEG to a PNG file, or I don't know how to rip a DVD with this, or I don't know how to do whatever. Oh, well, I'll just go do it, you know, on my other machine. And so I always had those crutches to fall back on. So I wasn't forced to learn Linux, and I guess I really didn't have the desire to do it. But now I do. Now I have this toy, and I want to play with it. I want to make it do the things I want it to do. So anyway, let's get into some of the projects. Speaking of what can you make the Raspberry Pi do, because you can make this thing do just about anything, and except for run Windows. But there are tons and tons of projects that people have done. And in the spirit of open source in this community, people create their little projects on the Raspberry Pi, and then they make an image of the SD card and they stick it out on the internet, and that's it. So you just download that image, blow it onto an SD card, and you have that setup, that system, whatever they've set up. So here are, oh gosh, I wrote down about 24. I don't know if I'll read all these. I'm going to skim through these, and I might read them all, but here's some of the things that I've seen that people have done with their Raspberry Pis. Number one is they have created a media streaming computer. The Raspberry Pi Linux, you can set it up to run the Xbox Media Center. XBMC, if you're not familiar with that, is a very popular, it's what I believe Boxy runs off of, and there's been several different ports, or forks, I probably should say, of Xbox Media Center. But since the Raspberry Pi is wireless, I mean, it can run with a wireless NIC off a USB, or you can wire it. It'll also output 1080p video, straight out of HDMI. So now you have a $35, streaming computer, basically. Hook that up to your TV in your living room. You can use one of the additional USB ports. One of the things that a lot of people do, and a lot of projects even require, is hooking up a USB, like a USB hub, where you get additional USB ports to the Pi. So I could see doing that. But, you set up a little thing, and then you'd be able to plug in an external USB hard drive to play movies off of, or you could stream them across a wired network or wireless. I don't really know about streaming 1080p video at, wireless speeds. I'd have to see if you could do that. But, regardless, like most of my movies, the DVDs that I rip, to the house, I store them in DivX just because, it's because what I started doing several years ago. And that's good enough for the kids, and it's good enough if you're just watching a movie, so, but anyway, media streamer. Also, arcade machine. I talked about RetroPie. I talked about PieMain. People are not only using these as a computer in their house where you can play games and things on it, but it's also, I'm starting to see people that have used them as the heart of a MAME cabinet. And, basically, if you've got this computer, a Raspberry Pi, and you have it boot into PieMain, obviously you could go change those configuration files, to where instead of going into a menu, it would go directly into, boot directly into some sort of front end. And there's a front end built into it. And since it supports USB game sticks, any of the, more popular game controllers, that are configured to run with MAME or just USB in general, these emulators will see that. So that's definitely, you're not going to run high end stuff with this. You're not going to run, some of the more games that need some horsepower to run, but, I've run through several 8-bit games. I've run through a few 16-bit games. Some of the games that I'm familiar with, like I played a few rounds of Shinobi. And if you know, my history with arcade cabinets, you know that I have owned 3 different Shinobi cabinets over time. And so what I mentioned before about the sound, I did notice that the sound was not as clear and not as loud as it should have been, but I thought the game itself ran in real time, full speed. So that's probably a trade-off that you can make somewhere. I played some Dig Dug and, a few other games, and I found that I thought that some of the sound samples might have been missing. I know that I played a little bit of Galaga, and when I got killed, which happened like on level 1 or maybe 2, that I didn't hear the sound for the explosion. So, if you have a MAME cabinet and you're running a PC in there already, I don't know that I would, obviously you're going to have a savings here of power. I mean, this thing runs off of 5 volt off a USB adapter. So, from a power standpoint, you would have some savings, but there might be some trade-off in quality. So before you just pull your PC out of your MAME cabinet and throw it down the stairs and order a Raspberry Pi, I would definitely, hook up with somebody that has one, or, I mean, we're not talking a giant investment, order one, $35 and do some playing, but yeah, I would definitely try it and try it with the games that you're interested in playing, before I made that kind of decision. Some of the other ones I've seen on here, home automation. That's very popular right now. You can configure, I guess there's a whole system called Zigbee. I was more familiar with, the X10 automation that Radio Shack sold, but there's several different systems that are compatible with, there's Linux software to run. So if you are wanting to, control your air conditioner, your lights, or different things in your home, and you automate those things, then you can set up the Raspberry Pi to do that. Some people are working on using the Raspberry Pi as the basis of a carputer. I'm very, very interested in setting up a carputer. If you don't know, basically this is replacing your entire stereo system, your entertainment system in your car with a computer. They sell them. And they're very expensive. If you just buy one off the shelf, we're talking probably $1,200 to $1,500. But if you build one, you could build one very inexpensively. Basically what you do is you buy a flat screen, a touch sensitive flat screen. You replace your stereo with that. And then with that, you can have the back end be a computer and basically run your entertainment center, which means you could play videos, you could play sound files. If you have a internet connection, like a MiFi, you could, have it check your email. You can hook it up to a USB GPS. There's all kinds of things you could do. And they have, the software, already assembled. All you have to do is build the hardware. Now, if you saw how crappy my dremeling was, that's what scares me about this carputer business, is that I know that I'm going to be doing some dremeling or something on my dash. And the fact that I have a $2 Pop-Tart case that I'm too embarrassed to show anybody, I really don't want to do that to the dash of my car. But, if you could buy a case or something like that that would fit in there, I think that would be an awesome project. And I think it would be a good use of the Raspberry Pi. So carputer is on there. Automation, as far as, let's see, there's controlling robots. There's some different things you can buy. I've seen some things that run, motors and servos, and they have cameras, and they have an infrared thing that will measure distance. I've seen people like automating little robots that drive around or whatever. So there's a whole thing there. But like I said, this is a $35 computer. So you buy it, you dedicate that to a project, and you want another one, buy another one. A home Linux server, that's a no-brainer right there if you want to use it as a full-fledged server, or just as a NAS if you want to hook up your back-end storage to it. Basically, you've got a server at this point that requires no fans. It's completely silent, and it runs off of 5 volts. So if you're a Linux guy, then that's a definite no-brainer right there. Controlling Christmas lights, timers. I talked about timers for home automation a little bit, power switches. This is all stuff that's real easily, once you buy this, you hook up to that adapter, that MyPi port that's on there, and you can run external things. I saw a project where a guy built this thing where basically all it does is it flashes an LED whenever you get new emails. And it's really simple to do. He wrote a script for Raspbian that went out and checked his email address, and when new things showed up, it would flash this LED. So I don't know if I want to dedicate a computer, to doing that, but I thought it was kind of cool. And then I think, well, I don't want to dedicate a computer, but the computer's $35. So would I buy something that costs $35 that sit on my desk and flash to LED? Probably. I bought a lot of stupid crap, so that would just be one more. You can use it as the guts to a digital picture frame, and I think this is a really cool idea. Some of the simple ones basically use the Pi, and it uses the HDMI output to display videos on a TV, which, that's a no-brainer. A lot of us have the ability to do that. Remember all those... Everybody had a digital picture frame on their desk for a while or whatever. So this is kind of a cool idea. However, there's some more advanced ones. I've seen some that will randomly grab pictures off of Tumblr and or PhotoBucket and show those pictures. You hook it up to wireless, and this thing is always updating itself. What I would like is one basically that, and I don't think, one method's any harder than the other. Something that would pull pictures from my Dropbox, and then when I want to update, I just go to Dropbox to this folder, and I would update the pictures. And I could see running something like that in a, like in the house, like get a flat screen TV, put it in something like a frame, put it, even put it matte, maybe put it behind glass so that it looks, maybe if you turn down the contrast or brightness, I don't know really, but I suspect you could get it to look not unlike a photo frame, and then have it cycle through pictures. I think that'd be really cool. Now you're past the $35 investment because you're buying a flat screen TV, but maybe one of these days I'll upgrade one of the other TVs and I'll use one of the existing TVs for something like that. This is another one. This is similar to that one about an item that flashed an LED. There's a project out there. You know what I'll do is I could list some of these projects on the notes page, but really all you have to do is Google, uses for Raspberry Pi, or interesting uses or unusual uses for Raspberry Pi, and you'll find all these same links that I found. I found one of someone who built a robot that speaks his tweets out loud. So, basically you're pulling down your Twitter feed and then there's a module for text to speech. You get new tweets or whatever. I think that'd be pretty cool, except for some of the people that I follow on Twitter. I'm not sure I want this little thing announcing some of their tweets. You can use it to take time-lapse photos. I mean, that's a pretty simple script. You hook it up to that camera. Along those same lines, you could have it be a security box that shoots video. There are little adapters you can buy that do motion sensing. So you could really build this entire thing to be the entire guts to a home security system. So I think that would be pretty cool. Let's skip some of these. Let's see. There's someone built one into basically a penetration testing hacker box. They built it inside of a what looked like a power strip. So you just walked in, plug this power strip in and walk away. And at that point, it would try to connect to the network. It would be a Wi-Fi hotspot. It would do all these little things. So because it's so small, you can hide this thing in a lot of places. I did see one where a guy used it as an alternative to Google Glass. And let me tell you, this is pretty hilarious what this guy did, but I know what he's getting at, but the implementation was kind of wacky because he had these giant glasses that, look like, what blind people wear. And then he had made the Raspberry Pi be portable by hooking it up to a box that held AA batteries. He had zip tied a tiny keyboard to his wrist and a few other things. So, and then when he was talking about the negative and the downsides, the first one said, the screens cover where you're going so you can't see, which would be fairly detrimental, I would think, to using this while driving or walking, really, or doing anything. But I like the idea. I like the idea of having a computer with me. What you would have to do, though, is figure out what does this offer that having a cell phone with you doesn't offer. It's kind of like this thing with the smartwatches right now. All of a sudden, everybody's got a smartwatch. A watch that, will vibrate your wrist. This sounds like hell to me, by the way. I don't want something that vibrates my wrist every time I get a tweet or a like on Facebook or anything like that. I don't want that in my life, but I understand that people do. But if you could get a computer with you that offered something that your cell phone doesn't, the Google Glass, I think where we're all going is that, I don't know what you call it, supplemental video, or I don't know what the term is, but like what the Terminator had, where he walked around and you had things identifying this is a 1982 Honda, and this license plate does this, and this is your friend Ralph. You don't recognize him, but his favorite food's lasagna or whatever. So I think that stuff is cool, that enhancing reality and stuff. I don't want to look like a blind guy. You wouldn't look like one. You would be one if you're wearing these glasses that block your vision. So I don't know. There's the part of me that thinks that it might not be a bad idea for us to all unplug every now and then too. But I do like that enhanced, reality type of system. So, Siri proxy. This is an interesting one. I am skipping down on this list a little bit, but Siri proxy is basically what it does is you run this, Siri proxy software on your home server and it intercepts your request to Siri. This is obviously iOS, specific, but they have the same thing for Android too. But basically what this does is you use your phone and you would say, Siri, I want you to do X. And then your wireless router intercepts that. And instead of sending that request to Apple, it sends it to your server. And then your server would do speech recognition and fulfill that request. So if you said, Siri, I want you to dim the lights, you're using the Siri on the iPhone, but instead of sending that request to Apple, it sends it to your local LAN, which interprets your request and then does that. So it's a speech recognition front end to home automation or whatever you want it to do. I mean, if you really want to set up Siri to, send out tweets or something like that, or whatever, you wanted to do. But I thought that one was really interesting. So this is one that I saw that I found very interesting, was driving a LCD or LED, light display. And you can buy these panels that are like, 24 by 24 or 16 by 32 or whatever. And you could daisy chain them together. And basically this would be like driving, a marquee, like one of those signs that has, the scrolling lights or whatever, and you could have a type message. Now I will tell you, for the past, I don't know how long, 10 or 15 years, I've had this project. I mean, I've never lifted a finger. So, but I've had this dream of having something mounted in the back of my car that would show what I'm listening to, like now playing Beastie Boys, whatever, or now playing, So I started thinking, this is actually doable. And I haven't seen anybody else ever do this. But if you had that carputer and you were listening to MP3s and you could pull the tags down and then run that output out to, a matrix thing that would be mounted in the back of your car. Really, this sounds like a good way to get rear-ended at an intersection. Now listening to, if the show had any budget, there would be a sound effect right there of a car crash, but there's no budget. And sound effects are free. Maybe I'll throw one in there. But anyway, to me, that seems really cool. Like, you know, you're going now it has the potential to be really not cool, because I have a lot of really, really embarrassing music in my 80s directory. So, you know, I could be, driving and all of a sudden, you know, Culture Club, and I'm like, no, I'm not really listening to that. You know, as people drive by and they're snickering at me. But I thought that would be a really cool thing, to do. And I even got this idea of like making a marquee kind of thing. And I don't know how much this would cost to put together, but that having a marquee like that, displaying your tweets, and then maybe even doing things in different colors, like, I mean, if they're multicolor LEDs, like maybe, Facebook updates would come in blue and tweets would come in red or something like that. And I don't know, just some ideas, but that's what I really like about the Raspberry Pi is it gets your creative juices flowing. It starts you on this path of, hey, what can I do with this? And then you go figure it out. So like I said, right now I'm at the phase of implementing things that other people have created, but that's where I want to get to. I want to get to these ideas that I've had for years and years, and I want to make my ideas come true with the Raspberry Pi. My dreams come true. Sounds dumb. But, so that's my vision. A few other things there, you know what, I'm gonna skip down. These are all things you could Google. Kiosk. I thought that was an interesting one just because it's a low cost. You don't have to worry about somebody stealing the computer. You know, you just have a $35 computer in there and obviously you could lock it down. Things that you could connect to your Pi. And I got these out of, an article from Magazine. Camera, I mentioned that. You can buy a small camera, it's like a pinhole type camera, and you could use that to hook up to your Pi. There's also a distance measurer. I talked about that with the robot thing. It's a couple of infrared sensors or whatever, and how cool would that be to make the little droid from Star Wars that Chewbacca roared at? In fact, maybe you could make something that has a microphone as well, and so it would wander around your house, and then whenever it hears something over a certain decibel or whatever, it turns around, does a 180 and runs the other way. That might be cool. The infrared sensors I talked about, for motion, detection or whatever. And also there's I saw a small LCD display. It's 20 by 4 and it just has, not LCD, sorry, LED. But it's 20 by 4 matrix and it just plugs right into that thing and you can make it display whatever you want, whether it's text or, an equalizer or whatever. So Raspberry Pi, the reason I wanted to do this episode is because I like that it is helping me connect to those old feelings, those days of using technology to come, not using it just as what's offered. I mean, when you have Windows 8, like I have on this laptop that's staring at me, I can't just go, well, I wish it would do this. I mean, maybe if someone wrote a program that does that, then I could do whatever that is. But I mean, it's kind of this little framework and you have to operate within that framework. But the Raspberry Pi, it doesn't really have a framework. It says, here's this little thing. What do you want to make it do? And so I missed that. I missed that era from the old days of computing. And so maybe I'll do projects with it. Maybe I won't. I hope that I do, but more than what it actually does or can do. I'm attracted to the idea. I'm attracted to, that it is this little $35 thing and it is sparking my imagination. It is making me want to go out and do things. Who knows? Maybe at some point I will record an episode of You Don't Know Flack strictly on the Raspberry Pi. Heck, I do it on the Commodore 64 all the time. So how much harder could it be to do it on a Raspberry Pi? But, so anyway, as I proceed down this path of the Raspberry Pi and getting it to do things. And as I get it to interface things, I'll mention it. I may mention it in other future episodes of You Don't Know Flack or Loading Time. That's why I wanted to talk about it. Not really to talk about anything that I've done, but what other people have done with it, and that maybe it will inspire you to go back in. I mean, at one point, I think all of us loved computers, and I find these days that I don't love computers the way I used to. It's like, maybe this is a crazy example. I'm looking here. I just put up some shelves the other day, and to put these shelves into place, I used a hammer. And so when you were a kid, remember when you got a hammer and you would just go hammer the crap out of things and how much fun that is? But not many people these days get pure joy from using a hammer. Maybe, I don't know who would, mobsters. But, now it's just a tool. And unfortunately for me and a lot of us, computers became a tool. When I go to work, I use computers all day. I never get excited when I go to work and turn my computer on. I'm not like, oh, look at that RAM count up. Listen to that fan fire. Oh, this is going to be a good boot. And there was a time when it was like that. There was a time when every time I turned on my Commodore and you had that blue on blue screen and the cursor flashing, and it was like, what am I going to do with this thing today? What am I going to make this do? What am I going to download that's new or whatever? And when we depend on computers every day for our jobs, they just become a tool, And so I'm hoping, and maybe I like the concept better than the reality, but I'm hoping that that's where the Raspberry Pi takes me. And maybe not to get too cheeseball, but maybe it doesn't take me anywhere. Maybe it lets me go. Maybe it lets me go where I want to go and do things with it that I want to do. So anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about the Raspberry Pi. I was going to say this episode's a little short, but I think I rambled on so much crap that it may be a normal length. So, anyway, tomorrow I'm recording a new episode of Throwback Reviews. We just did an episode of The Great Outdoors, and, next week or tomorrow we're going to record an episode about Caddyshack. So we're really doing some classic 80s movies right now. So if you're into classic 80s, please join us over at throwbackreviews.com. I have a upcoming episode loosely scheduled with the Adventure Club podcast. We're going to talk about AOL. I'm looking forward to that. So, all the normal people that I plug, the 2600 Game by Game podcast. I've been listening to Doug McCoy's Creepy Cool Movies. That's another a great podcast. So lots of good stuff out there. Once again, thanks for tuning in to You Don't Know Flack. Hang in there with me as I get over this little hurdle in recording schedules. We get everything back on track. I am going to, when I'm done with this recording right now, I'm going to go email the two people that I've talked about doing shows with and see if I can schedule something for this week. So that would be a cool thing to do next week. So anyway, thank you once again for tuning in to You Don't Know Flack. That's about all I have to say. Once again, if you want to, if you have feedback about this episode or any other episode of You Don't Know Flack, you can email me at robohara@robohara.com or leave a message for me on the You Don't Know Flack voicemail box, which is area code 405-486. You Don't Know Flack. That's YDKF. Leave a message 24 hours. It doesn't really ring anywhere. It just leaves a message. And that's a great way to get a hold of me. So thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you next week on another episode of You Don't Know Flack.